Hey guys, welcome to the first official episode of the Mixing Martial Arts podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Wagner, and I've been meaning to get back into podcasting for a while, but I've been a bit lazy about it lately. And this past week, there was an awesome fight between Khunsuklek and Siam in Muay Thai that I'm super excited to talk about, so I figured this would be a great time to do it. I used to run a Muay Thai podcast, the Eight Limbs podcast, that I stopped a couple years ago. But for this one, I'm going to open it up to the wider world of combat sports. I'll probably be talking mostly about MMA and Muay Thai, because that's mostly what I watch week to week. But now and again, if there's a big Rise or K1 kickboxing card, or some important boxing fights, I might bring that up too. But most of my focus will be on MMA and Muay Thai. I'll start with the MMA, just because there's probably like 6 people that are going to be listening to this for the Muay Thai, and the MMA fans just have a lot more options. If I start boring you with my Muay Thai talk, you MMA fans can go off and listen to Jack Slack or Heavy Hands or whatever. So my Muay Thai nerds will just have to grin and bear it while I sit here and talk about Derek Lewis. Speaking of whom, last week's UFC card was headlined by Derek Lewis versus, let me check Wikipedia, Rodrigo Nascimento. Okay, sure. I didn't watch the main event because I value my time, but there were some fun fights on that. I'll start with one of my top boys in Carlos Diego Ferreira taking on Mateusz Rambowski or something like that. I've been watching Muay Thai long enough that I can kind of pronounce Thai names well enough, but the Polish ones still kill me. Anyways, Carlos Diego Ferreira is almost 40 years old. He's been fighting forever and has been a long time top lightweight. So this was kind of the feed the old veteran to a new guy to build up his name kind of fight. But Ferreira wasn't having it. He got beaten up a little bit in the first round. Rambowski came out really hot and knocked him down, hurt him near the end of the round. And then in rounds 2 and 3, as they got a little bit more tired, and Rambowski's enthusiasm kind of waned, Ferreira's experience took over, and you really saw like the contrast between Rambowski's kind of nervous aggression and Ferreira's comfort and ability to take the openings that are there. Rambowski's a decent fighter. He's pretty well-rounded. His striking isn't too bad. He's a pretty good pressure fighter, but he's very rote, and he has to use a lot of energy to kind of force his strikes through openings. He's not really a great organic striker. He doesn't really adjust his shot selection or use like a few feeler punches to see where you're going to move and then hit you where you're going to be. He's not really creating openings with feints that much. He can feint you back to the cage, but he's not really gathering a lot of information with those feints and putting them to use later. Ferreira, he's not the best striker in the world himself, but you can see, especially in the second and third round, how his experience lets him kind of just pick at Rambowski with little throwaway shots, let him move himself out of position, and let him make all those like big reactions that take a lot of energy, and then punish him for it. So as the fight wore on and Ferreira was still there after Rambowski had hit him hard a few times and used up a lot of energy, they both got tired, but Ferreira's experience and his patience and his ability to just kind of take openings as they arise and create his own openings with feints and with light jabs, it let him use a lot of lower energy shots to kind of draw Rambowski out of position and then finish with his high energy shots when they count. Whereas Rambowski was still trying those big moves and they just weren't working. And as the fight went on and he got more tired, he had to keep giving up space. And we really saw how he kind of crumbles without the ability to enforce his constant pressure. His defense and exchanges is, like his offense, very rote. Ferreira was constantly exploiting him dipping to the side. Whenever Ferreira feinted at him or came in like he was going to exchange, Rambowski would just dip down to the open side. And Ferreira was constantly exploiting that with head kicks and knees. Rambowski also likes to hit takedowns to buy himself a little bit of time to recover after going with his high energy pressure for a while. And Ferreira is a nightmare to do that against. Always the best part of any Carlos Diego Ferreira fight is his beautiful counter wrestling. I remember that fight against Gregor Gillespie he had a couple of years back. Just constant, gorgeous counter wrestling from him until he gets tired, and then Gregor pounds him out. But for the first round and a half of that fight, he's fighting a former NCAA champ and a super athletic wrestler who's just going all out trying to take him down, and Ferreira's putting him in crucifixes, hitting switches, just putting on a clinic of how to counter wrestling with BJJ and like kind of funk moves as someone who's not very good at stopping takedowns in the initial shot. And we got a lot of that slick counter wrestling and counter grappling from Ferreira here. Rebecca took him down early, I think late in the first round, or I think this was early in the second round, and Ferreira immediately hit a really slick knee lever escape. He's in I think a butterfly guard, and as Rembowski goes to step over to half guard, he like stomps on his calf with his outside leg and just tilts his knees to the side, which off balances Rembowski and gives him enough space to back his hips out and put in an underhook. And he transitioned to a front headlock and started threatening Rembowski. There was another moment in the second where Rembowski's going for a high crotch on the cage, and Ferreira sits the corner and ends up in a sort of like pseudo crucifix position with the fence blocking him from like actually sitting back into the crucifix. Then he starts locking up Rembowski's outside wrist like he's threatening a Kimura. Rembowski has to extract the arm that's inside between Ferreira's legs so he can go about finishing a single leg. And as he does that, as he pulls it out, Ferreira keeps wrist control on the outside hand and just slides in a whizzer and stands back up. At one point when he was in guard, Ferreira got both of his feet on Rembowski's hips and just like lifted him, threw him up in the air with his feet, and got back up to the feet. There was also a really lovely moment in the third round where Rembowski had his back and he was trying to like mat return him so he could get into a ride. And Ferreira like locked around like a reverse grip, single leg kind of thing around his near leg and figure four'd his hands together. And then he hipped into Rembowski hard to knock him to the mat. And as soon as he did that, he backstepped over his legs to end up in kind of a reverse half guard position where his opposite leg was inside Rembowski's legs. Hani Yaya really likes that position from bottom. He'll go to deep half guard and then swing the guy's leg over, so they end up in the kind of reverse half guard. And then he looks to take their inside leg with like a little butterfly hook and slide them into a crab ride or to back control. But the grip Ferreira had on Rembowski's leg, the little figure four thing, before he hipped in and backstepped over, gave him an underhook on Rembowski's leg. So Rembowski couldn't really do much. He couldn't kind of extract that to a butterfly hook or start turning in and coming up on the underhook to get on top. And Ferreira just controlled the leg with the underhook, and then, he extracted his leg from in between Rembowski's and turned it into a mount. And then near the end of the fight, Ferreira hit a takedown on Rembowski and just pounded him out really quickly, I think with like 6 seconds left. Just a really classy veteran performance from a guy in the twilight of his career. Always love to see that. As for Rembowski, I like him. He's a fun fighter and he's pretty good. But we probably saw his ceiling there. He is, I think, 31 years old and already like 10 years into his career. He got into the UFC pretty late on in his career. So he probably doesn't have a lot of room to improve. But he'll be a fun action fighter at lightweight. Still probably good for a few years of fun fights at the very least. What else happened on this card? Esteban Ribovics versus Terrence McKinney was a fun fight that lasted like 30 seconds. I like Ribovics a lot. He's a fun little action fighter. Uses a lot of aggressive hooking combinations, like spamming left hooks and right hooks over and over. But even though he's aggressive and kind of prone to being countered, he has some interesting craft with it. He has some nice little shifting combinations to catch guys when they're running away from him. He'll switch stances a little bit and use little throwaway left hands in southpaw to bait guys into running into his big right hook. In this fight, he threw out a few shifting combinations at McKinney. He was using McKinney's jab as a trigger on those. So McKinney would come in and like kind of lunge in with a jab from a bit far away that would fall short, and then Ribovics would follow it back with his shifting combo. And McKinney tended to either give ground or duck in as he did that. So Ribovics started putting head kicks on it. He had one close call where McKinney ducked in and kind of looked like he might have ran into the knee a bit. And then after that, like 10 seconds later, he did the same thing again. McKinney backed up and he put a head kick on the end of a combo and just decapitated him. It was a super sick knockout. McKinney ended up slumped with his arms down against the cage. Really brutal knockout. And hopefully they can get a quick turnaround on Ribovics since the fight was so short. I wrote an article about Esteban Ribovics a while ago that I just updated a little after the McKinney fight and republished. You can find that at mixingmartialarts.com. I look at how he uses the right hook from an orthodox stance and some of the unique applications of that punch in MMA. It's a cool one as you don't see a lot of short-range right hookers in MMA. Charles Johnson and Jake Hadley put on a fun fight earlier on the prelims. Charles Johnson always a fun fight, except when he's fighting Muhammad Mokaev, though that's not really fair to him as nobody's ever really been able to put on a fun fight with Mokaev. I haven't watched a lot of Jake Hadley before, but he came out of the gate pressuring really hard, which is always a smart play against a guy like Charles Johnson. Yeah, he kind of has that Bobby Green style where he doesn't exactly do the same things technically, but he moves around a lot, likes to feint in open space, and he's kind of loose with his feet. He's like backstepping between stances a lot, does a lot of kind of little shifting things that operate best when you have distance. So if you can take that space away and put him against the cage, their reactions, they don't have the time to set up their work, and their reactions are more rushed, and you can land big counters. Hadley looked like he was a bit uncomfortable pressuring. I've only caught a bit of him before, so I don't know if that's not his usual style, but he looked to be kind of fighting against type a little bit. But he was doing well early. He was limiting Johnson's offense pretty well. He was taking away his time, and Johnson was having difficulty landing consistently because he wasn't able to do his usual feinting around and setting little footwork traps and stuff like that. Hadley had some decent body work. He landed some nice rear straights to the body. In the second round, Johnson realized that he had to start standing his ground and backing Hadley off and not letting him come forward with impunity. And then the fight started kind of spiraling for Hadley. He didn't look super comfortable in pocket exchanges, and Johnson, with his defensive feel and his more varied offense, was able to pick him apart a little bit there. One thing Hadley kept doing, he was using the little chicken wing block that Rory McDonald used to use all the time, where they kind of point their elbow towards their opponent and cover their chin with their lead shoulder as they're backing up. And it's kind of similar to the Stonewall guard or the Philly shell or whatever that you see from guys like Dustin Poirier. But Poirier uses it to give him some proactive defense in the pocket while he's fishing for counterpunches. The utility of that for a guy like Poirier is that he can hide behind his shoulder, keep his chin protected, and he doesn't have to see everything coming back at him. He can stand in the pocket, confident that anything coming off his right-hand side is going to be hard to land because he has his chin protected there. And then with that kind of removed as something he needs to constantly pay attention to, he has more room to key in on his rear hand counters and watch out for when the opponent overextends with their rear hand so he can punish it. But the way Hadley and Rory use it, they use it as a kind of a long-range retreating guard for when they're backing straight up. And I don't think there's a whole lot of utility using it that way. It's the way they use it. They'll back up in a straight line and chicken wing their elbow up so their chin is protected behind their shoulder. But when you're backing up at long range, all that's really doing is covering you against really long range wild overhands. And first of all, Charles Johnson doesn't really throw those, and they're not really the most pressing concern when you're backing at a range like that. At the distance Hadley was using that kind of guard, the wild overhand shouldn't be too hard to see anyway, and you can pull back from them. And you're also disarming your lead hand as a threat. You have your elbow pointed out towards the guy, and you're just covering against that one strike. But you can't really be doing anything useful with it. You're not popping a jab in his face, threatening lead hook counters. I would much rather see a guy, if you're gonna back up at long range and let them come forward like that, I would much rather have my lead hand out and threatening, either sticking a jab or jab feints in their face, just letting you seize the initiative back. Think about what Max Holloway does in the back foot when guys are pressing in on him. He will back up in straight lines. He's not always the best at immediately breaking the line of attack and pivoting off. But as soon as you take more than 1.5 steps toward him, he has that lead hand poking into your face, occupying your vision and letting him take back the initiative. He's always really hard to pressure because even if he'll back straight up, he's always doing something to seize the initiative back from you. And an active lead hand is a big important tool for that. Whereas Hadley was just kind of surrendering that, using it only as a defensive weapon that didn't really help him that much, especially against Charles Johnson, because Johnson, he just doesn't throw those kind of strikes at all. He mainly works with straight punches. There was one time where Hadley got backed out of an exchange with that chicken wing guard up, and Johnson just fed him a couple straight punches down the pipe. They went right past Hadley's guard, and he dropped him. So yeah, all these different defensive tools have trade-offs and strengths, but I think that particular kind of guard is structured more for a guy who's more comfortable in pocket exchanges and like able to fold over his hips and hit fluid counters on the inside. And I don't know how much a guy like Hadley is benefiting it versus the trade-off of not having an active lead hand in those situations. Charles Johnson's got a 2-fight win streak going now, which is nice to see after a couple of really close losses. He's beaten Azat Maxim and now Jake Hadley. He has the kind of style that would probably play really well over 5 rounds. That kind of like patient defensive comfort works well with counters, but isn't always the most urgent and doesn't always do the most to distinguish his work. And he kind of grows into the fight rather than starting off really hot. It's the lightweight Masvidal problem, basically. Johnson was calling for a 5-round fight after this. I don't know if I'd be super enthused about a Charles Johnson main event, but hell, I'll take it any damn day over a Derek Lewis main event. That's most of what stood out to me on the UFC card. Chase Hooper had a great performance over Vyacheslav Borshev. Borshev, a really crafty boxer, but doesn't have the durability or grappling to really function at a high level in MMA. Hooper surprised him on the feet in this one. He kind of feinted a takedown and threw out a loopy overhand that caught Borshev clean. And then for the next 10 or so minutes, Hooper just beat the dog shit out of him and didn't let up for a minute. There was some nice work from him on top. He flowed really nicely between control positions. A lot of times Borshev would underhook a leg and try to turn into him or tilt him off balance to stand back up. And Hooper would just ride it out, use the momentum to transition to the other side of Borshev's body and keep the assault going. Some nice ground and pound from Mount in that one too. There were some fights worth mentioning at Brave too. Brave CF, I think the promotion is called. Nikosi Nibele fought Jose Shorty Torres. Shorty Torres, a former UFC flyweight. I think he's actually the guy that Jared Brooks knocked himself out against, where Brooks picked him up and tried to slam him, then headbutted the canvas and knocked himself out. And then after the fight, Brooks hilariously went on social media and tried to insult him by saying something like, "You only won that fight because I knocked myself out. That happens 1 out of 10 times. The other 9 times I beat your ass," thereby estimating his own self-KO rate at 10%. But this fight was a showcase for Nikosi Nibele. It was at bantamweight, so Torres was a bit small. They'd fought twice previously. This was the trilogy match for the Brave Bantamweight Championship. Torres won the first fight by split decision, and then the rematch, Nibele won by a TKO retirement. I think it was like a cut or a corner stoppage. I can't remember exactly what happened, but this was the rubber match, and Nibele, aside from a couple moments where he got wrestled a little bit, he looked really sharp and beat Torres up quite badly. Nibele is a really cool prospect. I like him a lot. He's a really slick outside striker with pretty good instincts and like defensive eyes. He doesn't have the most depth, but he has a really good base of skills to kind of grow from. I think he's like 6 years into his career, so he has a lot of time to improve. I don't know how old he is because I checked on Tapology and they said his age is NA, but he's a really crafty switch hitter. He has some really nice shifting work. He'll come in one stance and then exit out the side door in the other stance, like little shifting V-steps. He changes direction really well along the cage. He's got a lot of really good outfighting instincts. When guys have him cornered on the cage, instead of immediately like lashing out and trying to hit them hard, or like losing his feet and running, both of which would expose you to dangerous counters, he'll square his stance a little bit and then like bounce side to side, feinting direction changes and trying to get his man to bite one way so he can move out the other way. In this fight, there was a really slick one where Torres was closing in on him against the cage, and Nibele feinted a direction change to get him rushing in, and then speared him on a knee and dropped him. One thing I really like about Nibele is he's a long-range outfighter, but he understands the value of closing distance when a guy's trying to pressure you. If you're always backing up or going side to side, there's nothing stopping the other guy from coming forward with impunity. He doesn't have to think twice about stepping in. He doesn't have to slow his pressure, and he can drive up a pace if you can't constantly stay away from him on the back foot. And if the guy's anywhere near as good as you, you're probably not going to be able to constantly stay away from him on the back foot. So knowing when to step in and close distance to give the guy something to think about is a crucial skill for outfighters, especially since it limits the distance you need to go to turn off the cage. If you're running around the perimeter of the cage, you have to work a lot harder and move a lot more to get away than your opponent does to keep up with you. But Nibele will step in with a couple hard punches, draw his opponent into a defensive reaction, and then use that to pivot off. And by closing distance, he's reduced the amount he has to pivot to escape them. He also, I really love that he closes distance with elbows and knees a lot. Really good strikes that are underused in MMA against pressure fighters. When somebody's coming forward relentlessly, if you just point your elbow out and stick them out at them, they'll often end up running onto it. Intercepting knees are a great tool for that too. And Nabele will throw those as intercepting counters, and he'll also step in with elbows and knees at range to close distance and let him pivot out to the side. He throws a lot of flashy strikes too, but they kind of rest atop a bedrock of decent sound fundamentals. He hit Torres with a nice little backwards elbow, the Anderson Silva Tony Strickland elbow, flying knees. He uses the little side kicks to the leg pretty well, but he'll actually set stuff up with them too. He'll establish them and then start feigning them to step outside the lead leg and throw us straight down the middle. There was also a really neat moment in this one where he came in and hit Torres a few times. Then as he was backing away, he tossed out the side kick to jam Torres' knee as he was stepping in to follow him. The main concern with Nabele right now is his grappling. He's decent in the clinch, but as the clinch exchange gets more layered and guys start pressing him to the cage and working in underhooks and body locks, he's a bit more vulnerable. And I've only seen him in his 3 fights with Shorty Torres so far, so I'm not sure how his striking holds up against a guy his own size. But a very interesting prospect and a really good watch, those fights. The other fight of interest on the Brave card was Ramazan Gitanov's fight against Prince Lalia. Ramazan Gitanov is one of the best prospects in MMA right now. He's currently 5-0, 27 years old, so a little bit older than the standard prospect earlier in their career, but he has extensive amateur experience. I think he won the IMMAF tournament twice. That's the main amateur organization that Muhammad Mokaev comes from. He has a 30-2 amateur record, so he's one of the most, if not the most, accomplished amateur fighters in MMA. I've only watched his pro fights, so I haven't seen a lot of his amateur work. He's mainly a grappler with very strong wrestling and top control, but he's pretty well rounded too and competent on the feet. This fight was over pretty quickly. Gitanov feinted his man back to the cage, threw an overhand and shifted forward to get in on his hips, and he finished it with a single leg. He ended up in kind of a sort of leg drag position where his hips were crowding Prince Lalia's and forcing them to turn away from him, not quite splitting the legs like you would with a leg drag. And Lalia reached around Gitanov's head to try and start turning up to a turtle position and building his base up to escape, and Gitanov immediately caught him with an arm triangle. Not a whole lot to learn from that fight. With Gitanov's extensive amateur experience, he's probably going to be mowing down most of the early career prospect fodder they feed him. And he's already pretty well developed as a fighter, similar to Mokaev, who came in with a lot of amateur experience and then was ready to go into the UFC pretty quickly. So I hope Gitanov gets a shot in a major promotion soon. Alright, that about covers it for the MMA this week. Now on to the Muay Thai. The big fight here was Khunsuklek versus Pet Siam. Khunsuklek Boomdexian versus Pet Siam Jor Petrea. Khunsuklek came into this fight on an insane 39-fight win streak. His last fight that wasn't a win was a draw back in 2019. He first started fighting elite competition last year with a win over Pangtor Porlakboon, and since then he's won 4 straight, winning his last one over Kumandoy Pet Yindi last month in April. He beat Kumandoy for the Rajadamnern Stadium 118-pound title, and Kumandoy is one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in Muay Thai right now. This time he was defending his 118-pound title against Pet Siam. Pet Siam is the Rajadamnern 122-pound champion, although strangely he won that belt while weighing in at 118 pounds against Wudakorn, and he hasn't fought up to 122 himself yet, so these guys are in the same weight class. Pet Siam was on a 12-fight win streak himself, and I do pound-for-pound rankings for Muay Thai each month, and I had Khunsuklek number 1 and Pet Siam number 8 coming into this fight, so it was one of the best fights you can make in Muay Thai. Khunsuklek is an amazing FMU fighter, a slick outside fighter with very good defense. He's an ambidextrous kicker, kicks very fluidly off both legs. A lot of times you'll see guys favor one leg depending on how their stance is set up. If somebody has a front foot heavy weight distribution like Superlek or Singdom or any of the main Kiat Mukau fighters, they work mostly with their rear kick since their weight is off that leg and on their front planting leg, so they can quickly spring into the rear kick. Fighters who are heavy on the rear foot tend to kick mostly with their lead leg like Buka. Khunsuklek has a fairly even weight distribution, and he has incredible balance and is great at manipulating his stance and his footwork and positioning so that he's always ready to pick either leg up. He's incredible in kicking exchanges. It looks like he can see everything coming before the opponent throws it, and he's always ready to block and counter or intercept with his own kick. Pet Siam is an elite kicker himself. He's a southpaw and favors the rear round kick. He's excellent at counter kicking off the back foot. He's really slick with his footwork and positioning too. If you watch his last fight against Chalamdam Neakathazala, Chalamdam is trying to set up these blitzing attacks and rushes, and Pet Siam just slides back, gets just out of range and fires off his kick. He's really good at throwing it on a hopping pivot. Usually when you're throwing the rear kick, you'll see guys step forward and pivot into the kick. But when somebody's coming at you and you're kicking at the same time you're moving backwards, you don't have time to take that step first. So what Pet Siam does is when a guy's coming at him, he'll hop slightly backwards with his lead leg, and at the same time, while his foot is in the air, he'll pivot on it so he can really quickly rotate his hips into the kick. He's very sound defensively also and great at hitting kind of catch and pitch counters with his kicks, where he'll block one as you come in, and then when your leg touches down and you're vulnerable, he'll throw out the rear kick. This was a really great fight from both guys. It felt like kind of a throwback to an older era in Muay Thai, where the action used to flow a lot better. You would get more continuous kicking exchanges, less referee separations. And this fight was basically one constant kicking exchange. It was really cool. Pet Siam started off the fight having a lot of success in the counter. Khunsuklek was initiating most of the exchanges, but Pet Siam was able to defend his initial entry. Khunsuklek would throw his rear leg round kick to close distance, and Pet Siam would block it and counter. Khunsuklek very quickly adjusted and started anticipating and countering Pet Siam's counter kick. One of the best ways to diffuse a sharp open side kicker who's a little bit better than you at long range is by closing off the open side. So a southpaw kicker like Pet Siam, his kicks fall on an orthodox opponent's open side, where all the squishy bits of the ribs and belly are exposed rather than falling on the back of the closed side. Open side kicks make it easier to maintain distance, just because that little pocket that they kick gives it a lot more stopping power. You can physically juggle somebody and bounce them off with an open side kick in a way that you can't really with a closed side kick. Kicking on the closed side, it'll ride up their back a little bit more. It won't physically push them back as much. They're easier to catch, and you're starting from a little bit closer, which makes timing the kick properly harder. If you're an orthodox fighter fighting a southpaw with a really good open side kick, it's very hard to get past that, and it's often easier to just close off that side and make the southpaw kick fall into your closed side rather than trying to beat him from long range. The fight I usually use as an example of this is the second fight between Rodtang Jitmoingnan and KNR PK Sayanchai. In their first fight, Rodtang got completely tooled by the southpaw KNR. KNR would just easily pick him off with the open side kick from long range, and then when Rodtang tried to storm past it, he would clinch him and body lock and throw him or tie him up. In their second fight, Rodtang advanced in a square stance and would often go southpaw or stay orthodox but just thrust his rear leg out in front of him as a check while he was advancing, just manipulating his stance and positioning so that KNR's southpaw kick would fall into his extended rear shin or onto his back on the closed side, and it didn't have that little pocket of the open side to kick into. What was interesting about Khunsuklek's performance here is that he kind of progressed through a series of different tactics to close off the open side. He started throwing marching combinations. He would throw the rear kick and then touch his kicking leg down in front of him in southpaw and follow up with a left kick. He found some success with that, but Pet Siam was still able to find his counter rear kick as the time between the marching steps when Khunsuklek kicked and then touched his leg down, Pet Siam could fire off a counter kick and land there. But Khunsuklek started using that as a bait and shifting forward with a foot sweep. So he would kick with his rear leg and then step forward, and then as Pet Siam goes to counter, he just sweeps out his plant leg while he's on one foot. In the second round, he started blocking the counters completely using a forward check. So he would kick with his rear leg, and then instead of touching the leg down and stepping into southpaw, where Pet Siam could time a counter kick, he would instead keep his kicking leg in front of him and just thrust it forward so he could take Pet Siam's counter kick on his shin and block it. There was one incredibly slick moment where he went to throw his rear kick and Pet Siam pulled his body back. He just rocked back a little bit to make the kick fall short. Almost anyone else would have over-rotated there and ended up getting kicked in the back, which is really high scoring. But Khunsuklek he externally rotated his leg just as it passed by Pet Siam's body to stop its momentum, drew it back in, and then kind of weaved his leg outside, pointing toward Pet Siam so he could check the kick. So he went from missing a kick to folding it right back into a check on the other side without even missing a beat. And then later on, Khunsuklek just started marching forward. He would draw his rear leg up, step into southpaw, and then lift his lead leg up to march back into orthodox. And Pet Siam wasn't able to time his southpaw kicks well because there's always a shin creating a barrier there. Pet Siam started relying more on his lead leg kick to target the new open side when Khunsuklek lifted his rear leg and thrust it out in front of him. And he had some success with that, but being able to force Pet Siam to rely more on his lead leg kick was a win in itself, because Pet Siam's not quite as fluid and dangerous with his lead leg as he has with his rear, and because the lead leg body kicks are a little bit easier to step through. They don't have the stopping power, and Khunsuklek was able to step in off them and threaten with punching combos, or he would push Pet Siam back to the ropes and land like a leaping kick or a jumping knee. So Khunsuklek firmly swung the momentum back to his side in the second round, taking away Pet Siam's open side kick, and then a couple seconds into the third round, he knocked him out with a beautiful head kick. The finish was absolutely gorgeous and came off a really slick exchange from Khunsuklek. He lifted his rear leg up and thrust it a bit forward to feint a kick, and he drew a check out of Pet Siam, and then once Pet Siam put his checking leg back on the ground, he threw the kick and landed. So he started off the exchange with the initiative, and Pet Siam was a step behind him. Pet Siam responded with his own rear kick, but Khunsuklek easily checked it, and then Pet Siam threw out a lead leg kick, but Khunsuklek took it on his forearm and scooped underneath it to pull it across his body and return a counter body kick. So he has the initiative on the exchange. Pet Siam is a little bit slow to react to him, and he's anticipating everything Pet Siam's doing. As he pulls the leg across the body and throws the counter kick, he adjusts his stance so he's falling back into a southpaw stance. And now when Pet Siam goes back to his rear kick, it falls on Khunsuklek's closed side, so it's easy to catch. He grabs the kick and then boots Pet Siam in the head. It was a beautiful sequence from Khunsuklek and a really high-level demonstration of balance, anticipation, and positioning in exchanges. Khunsuklek is now on a 40-fight win streak with wins over 2 pound-for-pound top 10 fighters. And meanwhile, Pet Siam had his Rajadamnern 122-pound belt stripped from him. I'm not 100% sure exactly how this works, but a lot of times when Thais lose in non-title fights, they'll be stripped of their championship belt. And in this fight, only Khunsuklek's 118-pound title was on the line, so it wasn't for Pet Siam's title. I think it mainly happens when they lose at or below their weight class, though. I think if you're moving up from 122 to 126 pounds and you lose, I don't think they would strip you then, but not 100% sure on that. But since Pet Siam never actually weighed in at 122 pounds, I don't know if he's going to go back for that title or if he's going to stick around at 118. As for Khunsuklek, he's beaten the very top guys in his division at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a rematch with Kumandoy sometime soon. That was a really close fight, and in Muay Thai, top guys usually fight each other multiple times, especially when the fight's close, so I wouldn't be surprised if they get a rematch soon. Another potential fight for Khunsuklek is Nadaka Yoshinari. Last year, he won Rajadamnern belts at 112 pounds and 115 pounds. With both of those guys having success across multiple divisions near each other's weight, we might see Nadaka move up to 118 pounds to fight Khunsuklek, or if Khunsuklek is still able to make 115. One other really fun fight last week was Wanchai Noi Heubang Sign against Yokiri Tien Muay Thai. This was on Sunday at a Channel 7 show. Wanchai Noi is a fun fighter with some really neat clinch work and crafty hand fighting. He won his last fight before this with a slick elbow knockout against JJ Pimensri. In this fight, he went after Yokiri pretty hard with leg kicks in the first couple of rounds. Often in Muay Thai nowadays, the first round or two are very slow and guys don't do much with them. So it was cool to see somebody using them to bank in some attritional damage. And then it paid off in the third round when he hurt Yokiri pretty bad. He kicked his rear leg up a lot. Yokiri was coming forward, pushing for the clinch. And when he stepped forward, Wanchai Noi would target the rear leg, or he would block Yokiri's kick, his rear leg kick, and then immediately counter by kicking the rear leg as he's planning it back down. There's a lot of really cool lateral movement and hand fighting from Wanchai Noi in the third round when Yokiri was trying to push for the clinch. Wanchai Noi fights in a really square and narrow stance, which gives him a lot of side-to-side maneuverability. Muay Thai's lack of footwork is kind of like a meme that people who don't watch Muay Thai and don't understand it repeat a lot. But I've been fairly critical of the footwork we see in modern Muay Thai. Guys just don't really move like they used to. The influence of boxing has diminished a lot in Thailand. Where in the golden age they used to have boxing matches on like every Roger Damron show pretty much. There were boxers in the gyms. There were gyms that had a big boxing presence and regularly sent their fighters into boxing to compete. I heard Karahat, I think it was on an interview by Sylvie von Douglas Itu, but Karahat, one of the greatest Muay Thai fighters of all time, and like one of the slickest with his footwork, he mentioned he was basically like forced to take amateur fights, I think for the Thai national boxing team. He had to fight like 13 times for them or something, and then they like let him go back in Muay Thai. So yeah, like that was a huge influence in the golden age, and it contributed a lot to their skill, their footwork, their defensive sensitivity and all that, and it's declined a lot. But Wan Chino's movement here was a good example of how, even though it's declined since its peak, it's not like you don't see like slick lateral movement and footwork in Muay Thai. It's just that the people who are talking about that aren't watching a lot of Muay Thai fights. He was doing a really great job pivoting away from Yokiri's rushes. The hand fighting from him was really nice too. There were a lot of nice subtle things with the hand fighting there. You could see him like playing with the pressure and tension of the gloves. Like when he was extending his hand to meet Yokiri's glove, he would like put a little bit of pressure to make him think a strike is coming, or to get him pushing back and then collapse it into an elbow or suddenly pivot off. There were some really nice moments there. When Yokiri did get into the clinch, Wan Chino would immediately pummel for inside control and look to pivot off or dip out the side. His clinch game reminded me a lot of Kompat Sitsarawatsa. They trained together for a while at the Sitsarawatsa gym before Kompat moved to, I think, Fairtex. He uses lateral movements and that kind of like turning footwork in the clinch really well. And you saw a lot of that from Wan Chino here. It was interesting. Wan Chino had him pretty hurt with leg kicks in the third round, and he went after him pretty hard. In the fourth round, he started to slow down a bit. Yokiri stopped going for the clinch so much, and he would just punch his way into range and follow it up with a kick. He had more success cornering Wan Chino against the ropes, and he was a little bit slow with his checking now. He looked like he tired out a little bit. So Yokiri was able to fight himself back into the fight. And it even got to a point where Wan Chino was chasing, trying to get scores back. With Muay Thai having a kind of holistic scoring system where previous rounds are considered when scoring the current round, it can kind of work against you sometimes to start off really strong and then fade. A lot of times, if you see a guy get dropped or hurt badly early, that can easily spell the end of the fight, because the person who dropped him can just fight off the back foot and fight defensively. And as long as he's not getting overwhelmed or doing a lot worse than he was, it's very hard to come back from that. But with Wan Chino here, he went after Yokiri early, and then when his volume kind of dwindled in the fourth round, it read more, and Yokiri started getting back into the fight. It read less as like that dominant control, and more as him fading and Yokiri coming on strong. But he was able to pull ahead again. In the fifth round, they did that kind of fifth round performance thing where they would like score and then take the back foot to show that they're ahead, and Wan Chino ended up coming out ahead and getting the decision. I'm not sure what the odds were like, or if it was really close and potentially tipping towards Yokiri's side. For me, Wan Chino's big work in the third round was enough for me to favor him going forward, but he was certainly fighting like he needed to make it up and like it was a close fight. Another fun fight was Yadzila Chorhapayak against Mati Toy Pidru. No idea how to say that one. Both of these guys were really active at kicking range and in the clinch. Mati had some really cool moments where he would shove Yadzila back and then land a kick. He had a few slick little trips in the clinch. But if you're going to go back and watch any of these fights, make it Pet Siam versus Khunsuklek. An incredible performance from one of the best strikers in the world right now. And it's a quick watch, ending just seconds into the third round. If you're interested in hearing more analysis about those Muay Thai fights and a few more, visit mixingmartialarts.com. I write a weekly recap of all the Muay Thai fights. And I also write in-depth long-form breakdowns for premium subscribers. Only $5 a month gets you early access to my video breakdowns, access to exclusive long-form breakdowns, occasional pulls into what kind of content I put out next. And now that I've launched the podcast, I'll probably start doing some premium episodes for subscribers from that too. All right, that's about everything I wanted to cover for the first episode. Thank you to anybody listening. And I just did this on sort of a whim, so I haven't yet sorted any intro or outro music. So you will have to listen to my voice fade out.